Hello, for today's lesson, which is Tuesday, September the 8th, I'm going to get you started with the understanding of knowing that even though I'm going to break this down in one video, this is going to carry out over several different class sessions. So with that being said, before we get into the lecture section, which is where you need to take notes, we are going to do a setup here called Cornell Notes, and this is introduced to you as a way to help keep things a little more organized. So if you look up here, it shows you that your topic, in this case, our topic would be types of business formats. And then we have our cues here on the left and our notes on the right, along with our date. So when it's referring to your cues, it's written after we've started the lecture. In this case, I can tell you your first cue is going to be sole proprietorship, followed by the main ideas, which the main ideas are going to be, for example, advantages or disadvantages. But I want to show it to you in this format first, because you notice it's kind of like a T. Topic up here, cues, notes, dates. And then if you come down to the bottom, it shows you the summary. Not sure in looking at it which way looks more easy to you. You are welcome to take the one that I have provided inside of our classroom and print it and use it for your note taking, or you can take a sheet of paper and simply draw the lines. So you've got a line going down and you've got a line going across, and what we have here is just like in the example. This is our topic, types of businesses, and we're using Cornell Notes. This is our cue column, which is what was on the other sheet, and this is our note-taking column. So if we go back real quick and look, there's your topic, there's your cues, and there's your notes. So what's going to happen is you're going to start here with sole proprietorship as your cue. And then in the sole proprietorship over here in the note-taking, you're going to write a trait about sole proprietorship. Then you're going to come here for examples. Then you're going to write some examples. Then you're going to come here for advantages. Write advantages over here. So if you look, it's already giving you the different topics. So the topics that we're going to cover is sole proprietorship, followed by these three elements that are associated with sole proprietorship. Then we have partnership with these three elements that are associated with partnership. And we will put our notes over here. So like in this section, I would type owned by one person. And for the examples, I would do, for example, there's another one that we're going to list in the PowerPoint, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and go on over to the PowerPoint and get you started. So we've got our types of businesses, and looking over our types of businesses, we are going to cover sole proprietorship, partnership, corporation, and franchise. And I'm going to speak a little bit faster than I normally would if we were in the classroom, with the understanding of I realize you're not going to take notes on this entire PowerPoint in one setting. But I'd like to give you the video in one setting, and then you take and break up the notes as we move through the class. So the very first thing that we're going to cover is sole proprietorship. So in covering sole proprietorship, using your notes that you've taken on a sheet of paper, or either the example that I gave you that you've printed out, you're going to set up your Cornell Notes with the left section being cues, the right section being where you take notes. And once again, I'm going to take you back to the example. But before I take you back to the example, I want you to notice our very first topic is sole proprietorship, and it is owned by one person. Examples: floral shops, bookstores, farms. Here's our advantages. Here's our disadvantages. So for just a minute, let's go back to the note-taking section. I have so many windows open. Give me just a minute. We will get back to the note-taking section. So if you look, cue column, note-taking, very first thing, sole proprietorship, owned by one person. Examples: floral shop, farms. And the other one that I did not list, is bookstores. Now, this is not the limits of just sole proprietorships. These are some examples that we're doing throughout our presentation. So now we're going to go into the advantages of a sole proprietorship. So I'm going to switch back over to screens and pull the PowerPoint back up so that way you can easily take notes as we move along. So in taking the notes as we move along, some other examples of sole proprietorship may be if you have a lawn mowing service, so you're cutting people's yards. That could be a sole proprietorship. Dog walking could be sole proprietorship. Mary Kay rep, pampered chef. So there's several different things that could fall under sole proprietorship. So what are some of the advantages of sole proprietorship? It is the easiest form of business to start. Next is you are your own boss. And being the only owner, you get to keep all the profits. So easiest to start, you're your own boss, and you get to keep all the profits. What does it mean you get to keep all the profits? That means any money that you make after you have paid all the bills would be considered profits. So you would be able to keep all of this money. So now the next thing is the disadvantages. Keep in mind you can pause this video if I'm moving too fast, so that way you can get all of this information. Normally I would not go this fast in the classroom. So now we're going to go into disadvantages. A disadvantage is that you as the owner have to pay for everything that is needed for the business. That means since you're the owner, everything's coming out of your pocket. The next thing is it's often difficult to obtain capital needed to start. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to break away from the video for just a minute, and I want us to look up the definition of capital. And I'm doing this purposely because I want you to get in the habit, if there's a term that I cover and I do not give you an explanation and it happens to be a term that you are not familiar with, I want you to get into the habit of looking up the term. And then if you still don't understand, what I want you to do is to ask me. So I've zoomed in a little bit, probably a little bit too much. And if we look here, the most important city or town of a country or region. Well, capital that it's referring to there would be like our capital for North Carolina is Raleigh. So that is not what we're referring to. So then we're going to come to the next one. Wealth in the form of money or other assets owned by a person or organization or available or contributed for a particular purpose, such as starting a company or investing. So capital, you can think of it as money or things that you need to run your business. For example, if we go back to the floral shop, a floral shop obviously is going to need a refrigerator in order to keep their product fresh. They need a cash register for ringing up customers and a counter to be able to prepare their floral arrangements. All of these items would be considered capital because they can take these items and sell them and turn it into cash. So it would be wealth in the form of money or other assets. So it is what is needed to run the business, be it money that you need to run the business or the actual equipment that you need to run the business with. So in going back to our PowerPoint, difficult to obtain the capital needed to get started. Well, the reason it's difficult is because right here in this first bullet where it says owner must pay for everything needed for the business. That is why it is difficult for you to get capital as a sole proprietor. Then we're going down to the third bullet where it is owner might lack business skills. So let's use the floral shop again as an example. Let's say you're extremely talented and can easily make many varieties of floral arrangements, but you're not necessarily very versed at math, and so that's one of your weaknesses, and so you cannot keep up with all of the income and expenses that are associated with managing a business. That is where we're referring to the owner might lack business skills. And then our next one is unlimited liability. So when it says unlimited, let's just read the description they have here. Owner, that means you, the sole proprietor, has full responsibility, full or unlimited, unlimited responsibility, full responsibility for all the company's debts. Another word for debts would be liability, and can lose entire investment as well as personal assets. So what it's telling you is the only owner of the business, you are totally and fully, unlimitedly responsible for your company's debts. That means any money you put in this business could turn out to be a profit or it could turn out to be a complete loss. So that's why we're referring to unlimited liability. We will talk about that more as we progress through the class and as we go through some of our different forms of business ownership. But this is one of the major disadvantages of a sole proprietorship. So what we're going to do now is we're going to move on to partnership. Okay, so now we're going to go into partnership, still using our Cornell Notes layout. So our Q would be partnership, followed by examples, advantages, and disadvantages. Of course, you'll see this information once we get onto the PowerPoint. But since Cornell Notes may be new to you, I wanted to kind of show you a preview before you actually started using the second portion of this note processing. So what we're going to do now is move over to partnership. And in moving over to partnership, it's very similar to a sole proprietorship, but the difference is it is owned by two or more people. So I want you to notice it's owned by two or more people. And examples would be law firms, medical practices, and auto body repair. So this is not necessarily the only types of partnerships. It just happens to be the ones that we're using for examples. So I'm sure you've probably been to a doctor's office that maybe had more than one doctor in there. That would be considered a partnership because they are working together as partners. You may see every once in a while companies, when you're riding down the road or coming to your house, services being used, it might say such and such and sons. So the and sons represents that there is a partnership between the father and the son. It would be a family-owned business, and being a family-owned business, it can still be a partnership. So then if we move on to our advantages, like a sole proprietorship, it is relatively easy to start. It's not quite as easy to start as a sole proprietorship because you do have to take in consideration the thoughts and expectations of your partner. So that is some of the things that when you're starting to form a partnership, you will need to take in consideration, but it is still relatively easy. It's also easier to obtain capital than a sole partnership because you can take yours and your partner or partners' funds and mesh them together. So that way, instead of you being responsible for absolutely all of the capital, you could split that cost amongst partners. You could also, as one of the advantages, be able to share skills and talents, so it's not limited to just one person, the owner, as far as getting the business set up and running, because you would be pulling your skills and talents together as partners, and you would also be sharing risk, which is an advantage because one of the things that you will do as a business owner is you will need to take what is considered business risk. And we'll discuss business risk more as we move forward in the course. So our disadvantages, I'm going to go through these really quickly. Disadvantage, partnership agreement is needed to start. So this means you've got to do a lot of upfront work in order to determine how are you going to solve an issue or a problem if it comes about. Let me give you an example. One of the things that you've got to be concerned with as a partner is that your partner spends the money of the business correctly and does not make, or appropriately, and does not make decisions that you may be responsible for without you being involved. So when it comes to a partnership agreement, you've got to plan ahead and decide how things are going to be done since you're responsible technically to each other. Another thing is partners might not get along well. Well, it's kind of like, okay, if you're not going to get along well, why are you going to go in business together? And one of the examples that I often use in the classroom, have you ever been friends with somebody that once upon a time, or not once upon a time, but in the past, you were really good friends and now you're not? Something happened and it changed and now you no longer get along as well. So it's kind of like this with partners. It may be that in the very beginning, you do get along well, but then things change over time and you do not get along as well. Partners must share the profits. So here's the thing. Partners are sharing the profits, and it could be that you share the profits equally even though one partner is working harder than the other partner. Or it could be that just one partner happens to be a better business person and can bring in more profits, Yet the partner that's not as good is still reaping the benefits. So that could be a disadvantage. But regardless of how you look at it, when you happen to split money in half, that would be considered a disadvantage. Partners must be reorganized if one partner quits. So let's say you go into business with a partner and that partner decides that they no longer want to be in business. Then what happens is the business has to be dissolved or ended and restarted under a new business name and format. So it cannot continue if one business partner decides that they no longer want to be part of the partnership. The business has to be dissolved. Yes, it can carry on business, but it is not going to be the same business. It has to take on a whole new identity. And then partners share unlimited liability, which goes back to what I've touched on a little bit already, that if your business partner makes a decision that you do not agree with, you're still liable because you and the partners are working together. Now, there are some things that protect you from this, such as an LLC or an LLP. We do not get into these in this class. We might touch on it, bring it up, but it is not something that we cover in this class. So I do want you to be aware of it, but with the true understanding that when we're talking about partnership for the purposes of this class, it is unlimited liability. So stop and think about it kind of like marriage. When you and your spouse become married, you are partners and you both share liability regardless of what each partner may decide to do. So I don't know that marriage is necessarily the best way to present it, but I think it may make a little bit more relevance because when your mother and your father do things, they are both equally responsible for the decisions that are made inside the household. All right, so now what we're going to do is we're going to move on to corporation. So in moving on to corporation, this one's a little more difficult to understand. And when I say it's a little more difficult to understand, let me go ahead and give you the definition that it shares here on our screen. It shares on our screen, owned by many people. So in showing that it is owned by many people, okay, so in showing that it is owned by many people, the many people would be stockholders, but it is treated by law as one person, can own property, pay taxes, make contracts. So let's say this again. It is owned by many people. The many people that it is referenced is the stockholders. But by law, a corporation is considered one person. So there could be 10 owners. There could be 10,000 owners. All of these owners would be stockholders. This would be people that have invested in this company. As an investor or a stockholder, you are an owner. But as far as the law sees a corporation, the law sees a corporation as one person. Even though a corporation is not a real person, the law sees it as one person, which means that a corporation can own property, a corporation can pay taxes, and a corporation can make contracts just like a person could do. And we will cover more on corporation as we move forward in the class, but the main thing you need to know is it's owned by many people and that the people are the stockholders, and by law it is considered a separate entity. It is recognized as one person. So our advantages. Corporations can raise money by selling stock. So when a corporation needs more money and would like to expand, they have the opportunity to sell stock to do this. Has limited liability, so if you were to invest stock in a corporation, the only thing that you potentially would lose as far as your investment would be the money that you invested in the stocks. Corporations continue when stockholders sell stocks. So if you were to purchase in Corporation A stock, but then you decided you no longer wanted to be a stockholder or owner, you could sell that stock, yet the corporation would continue to run, unlike our partnership that would need to be dissolved when somebody decided they no longer wanted to be an owner. Then we have corporations can always make more money by selling more stock. So it goes back to what I touched on in the beginning, that if you are a corporation and you wanted to expand or grow your business, you do have the opportunity to raise that additional money by selling stocks. So we did jump around a little bit, and you'll notice here some of our examples are Nike, IBM, and Google. Obviously, this is a fairly old slide, so some of these you may not recognize, with IBM being specifically the one I'm referencing. So I'm going to give you a company that I do know you'll recognize, and that would be Dell. IBM stands for International Business Machines, and that was a very dominant company many years ago, but with the onset of technology, some of that has changed. So you would probably be more familiar right now with Dell. Let's move on to our disadvantages. Corporations are taxed on their profits. So that doesn't sound like a disadvantage, considering that we're all taxed, but the reason it's a disadvantage to a corporation is because a corporation is taxed, but then the owners are taxed. So this is what is referred to as double taxation. So let's say that you and I, or let's say you and our entire class own a corporation. Well, because a corporation is treated by law as one person, the corporation is going to be taxed. But then you and I, the owners that receive some of the profit, are also going to be taxed. So that would be considered double taxation. It's going to be taxed twice. Whereas if you are a sole proprietorship or a partnership, you are only taxed once on the profits. And there's a lot more detail that we can go in on this also. But once again, I'm just touching on the bare minimum right now to give you an introduction as we're going through our course. We focus on each individual type as we move forward. So now we have government closely regulates corporation. One of the reasons the government closely regulates corporation, and I probably will be saying this incorrectly, Sarbanes and Oxley had this really big scheme going on to where they were printing, publishing financial reports that made it appear that the company was doing really well, and people were continuing to invest in this business as stockholders to become owners, thinking that the business was doing really well. To come to find out that the CEOs were taking the money to buy private jets, take trips, so forth and so on, and using the money, and the money really was not there. What money am I referring to? The money that was raised through stockholders investing in this business. So people lost millions of dollars once the company finally went bankrupt, and that is when the government put in what is the Sarbanes and Oxley Act. And so now corporations are more closely governed to make sure that people who invest have much more security when they're investing their money to become stockholders, that the corporations are actually audited and confirmed and not necessarily publishing fake reports. And you go into the next bullet, which goes into it's more difficult to start a corporation. And the reason it's more difficult to start a corporation is the state that you're in, you must go get what is called a corporate charter. It is also called an Articles of Corporation. So if we were to start a corporation here in North Carolina, then we would need to go get what is referred to as a corporate charter, probably more often here as Articles of Incorporation, and we would do that with the North Carolina Secretary of State. Now, moving on to franchise. Franchise is a contractual agreement to sell a company's products or services in a specific geographic area. So you're under a contract that you're going to sell a company's services or products or both in a specific area. If you come look over here at our examples, you may recognize all of these, I'm not sure, but I'll give you some additional examples just in case. Taco Bell is one, McDonald's is one, Blockbuster you may or you may not recognize. In class, some of the examples that people have given as a substitute for that would be Redbox. Another example would be Molly Mays. I know that's not even in alignment with Blockbuster or Redbox, but I'm trying to name companies that I feel like you would be familiar with. So those would all be franchises to where you'd be under a contractual agreement to sell the products, services, or both. So let's go into our advantages. It's fairly easy to start, and the reason a franchise is fairly easy to start is because obviously somebody's already done the work before you. It's proven to be a good product or service that sells, and so you just follow their format. That's why it is easy to start. Going into the second bullet, you as the franchisee, meaning that if you were to sign a contract to start a Taco Bell, you would be considered the franchisee. You can rely on the expertise and good name of the parent company. In this case, we're going to assume Taco Bell operates under the name Taco Bell. So you could go on their good name and their proven expertise. And then we have franchisee can get the needed guidance in operating the business from the franchisor. So one of the things when you sign that contract is that company wants to see you successful because it means they get additional money as their business or franchise expands. So they are there to offer you guidance. What are some of the disadvantages? Well, some of the disadvantages are our franchisors are strict about how the business is run. So you have got to follow their guidelines. Everything, if you go to a Taco Bell in North Carolina, then you should get the same type of food, same taste, same wrapper in California. So when we're saying strict, it could be that if I walk into North Carolina or I walk into a California store or I walk into a Texas store, Wisconsin Taco Bell, I should expect it to look very similar, especially the more strict they are in about how the business runs. The second bullet is franchise is limited in what products or services can be sold. So let's say your grandmother makes the absolute best apple pie that has ever hit the face of this planet. With that being said, if you are a franchise and you owned, we're going to use Taco Bell as our example, you could not bring your grandmother's apple pie into your store that you own here locally, even though you know it's the best apple pie that has ever hit the planet because it does not follow the terms of your contract. And you know that if you were to bring in that apple pie that you would just make bukus of money because, like I said, it is the absolute best apple pie that has ever hit the planet, and that you know if you brought it in your store, it would increase sales tremendously. But you cannot do that as a franchisee because your contract does not allow you to do that. So you've got to provide the products or services or both based on your contract. And then our third bullet, franchise must operate like every other franchise, which I've kind of already touched on that when you go inside of, once again, we'll use Taco Bell as the example, a Taco Bell in North Carolina, a Taco Bell in Texas, a Taco Bell in Oregon. You should expect it to be the same regardless of where you are. So that covers our 4 topics, and we will get into more detail as we're moving forward in the class about each type.